Thank you all for coming here today. I really appreciate coming to update on biomedical and health and medical and development pipeline. I am Sheila Murphy. I am the Vice President of Advocacy Programs and Initiatives at Research America. I'd like to thank Senator Murphy for sponsoring our group today. Terrific. And Research America is a nonprofit medical and health research advocacy organization, and we advocate for science, discovery, and innovation to achieve better health for everyone. Today's briefing is going to look at the process by which biomedical research makes medical progress for patients. Incredibly important. Making progress against diseases that inflict heavy burdens and high costs on families requires input from the full range of research and development pipeline and disciplines, funding from both public and private sectors, and substantial and well-timed patient engagement. This briefing will shed light on the path to medical progress in the multi-sector biomedical R&D continuum from the lab to the patient. And I'm going to introduce our panelists here today. First, we have Dr. Leslie Criswell, who is the director of the National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases, otherwise known as NIAMS, at the NIH. And Dr. Criswell has been director of NIAMS since 2021. And before that, she was vice chancellor of research at the University of California at San Francisco. And she was a board-certified rheumatologist and was a professor of rheumatology and orofacial sciences at UCSF. We also have Mary Crimmings, who's the interim CEO of the Lupus Foundation of America. And the Lupus Foundation of America's mission is to improve the quality of life for people affected by lupus through programs of research, education, support, and advocacy. And then we have Clay Alsbach, who is a principal at Levitt Partners and a former Hill Rat with me. Prior to joining Levitt Partners, he was chief health counsel for Chairman Fred Upton on the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House. And then another former Hill Rat for many years, former colleague is Jocelyn Moore. She's our moderator, and she's senior managing director of corporate affairs at Pretium and a specialized alternative investment management firm. And before that, she spent 15 years in the Senate in a variety of roles. She worked on pivotal healthcare legislation such as healthcare reform and the CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program. And she currently serves on a variety of corporate boards and corporate and nonprofit boards, including the West Virginia University Health System Board of Directors. And before the panel starts, it's going to be my pleasure to turn the mic over to Aisling McDonald, who's Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Eshoo of California. And Congresswoman Eshoo is co-chair of the Biomedical Research Caucus and has been a huge champion for health and medical research over the years. Aisling?
Cool.
Hi, yes, I'm Ashley McDonough from Congresswoman Eshoo's office. So as a current Hill Rat, I'll do the typical Hill caveat of not officially speaking on behalf of the Congresswoman, although I don't know why I would say that, even because she's a huge supporter of biomedical research and Research America and public partnerships in general to make sure that patients actually benefit from breakthroughs. Congresswoman Eshoo is the Democratic ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee, and then as of 3 weeks ago, now the co-chair of the Biomedical Research Caucus. When Dr. Keith Yamamoto from UCSF and 4 Nobel Prize winners get on the Zoom with her, she makes a lot of promises, and so we're happy to take on that important role. He represents Silicon Valley and Stanford, so obviously have a major interest in biomedical research. She's a huge supporter of the National Institutes of Health, referring to them often, as I think is a common phrase here, the National Institutes Pope. But NIH does basic research and investigator-led research that can take 10 years to develop and is plants the seeds to develop all those breakthroughs. And that's the foundation of making sure patients get cures and treatments. But the second half of that, Congresswoman Eshoo is always focused on too, which I think is where the private market comes in. So she's been a lead supporter of the creation of ARPA-H, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, which kind of picks up where NIH leaves off to make sure that we are doing that advanced research to, if they found a breakthrough, what does that mean, and how do we actually like create the mechanism to get that to the person? And she's always very interested also in the reimbursement and cost of these treatments and medications, because you can create wonderful, amazing things, but if a patient's not getting it, then what does that mean? So taking that next step, and oftentimes it's tackling that valley of death that has been a major focus, I think, of for her entire career. Of she was the creator of the Biomedical Advanced Research Authority, BARDA, which kind of tries to move that valley of death of for countermeasures for biosecurity, which, just as a plug there, we are reauthorizing this year as part of PAPA. So make sure that you all are paying attention to that. And then also now with ARPA-H is another part where you're trying to kind of bridge that gap of the value of death, which is you create something, it has promise, but it's still risky. So investors don't invest in it. How do you make sure that you lower that risk so that people do invest in it and can show kind of the business case for how this is going to help people and make money, so that it actually gets created. So with that, it's wonderful to see such leaders on working on this. And my last plug would just be that all of these are at risk if we when we talk about cutting the budget. So it's hugely important for the National Institutes of Health to continue to have strong, sustained funding. It's hugely important for ARPA-H when it's just getting off its feet to have it. Hugely important for us our biosecurity to continue to have BARDA funded and supported. And hugely important then to continue to make sure that our the coverage programs and everything else that actually pays for treatments and helps people get it. It's what supports the private market. It's what supports early researchers. It's what supports kind of what makes America a leader in biomedicine. So last plug for that here. But thank you all for this event, and I wish the Congresswoman could be here. She's literally on a plane from California right now, so she couldn't. But wonderful that this is happening in Research America too. Thanks.
On to me? Okay, all right. Good morning, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Jocelyn Moore, and thank you to Research America and our esteemed panelists. Really looking forward to this discussion. And Sheila and Clay, I don't know about you as former Hill Rats, but being in this room is quite a bit nostalgic, especially being here in person, which seems like a thing of the past these days. So thank you for all of you being here. So great to see all of your faces. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Please silence your cell phones if you haven't done so already. Secondly, at the end of the panel discussion, we will have questions. So if you have burning questions, please write them down. With that, let's jump right in, shall we? Let's begin with a quick overview of the research and development continuum. You should have received this handy dandy handout, which is quite helpful and very beautiful, Sheila and Sarah. It walks through the 5 main phases in research and development. 1, basic research answers fundamental biological questions. 2, applied research to solve a problem by uncovering and assessing potential paths. 3, clinical trials, multiple phases testing the targets as well as further refining and assessing potential advancements. 4, regulatory review needs no explanation in this crowd. And 5, finally, therapeutic production and distribution. So academic and independent research institutions, private companies, and the federal government play unique and complementary roles in the R&D ecosystem that ideally include the perspectives of the patient as central to each of these 5 phases. As we look at the research continuum, it's helpful to use the lens of the search for treatments for a particular disease. May is Lupus Awareness Month, and since lupus clearly fits the definition of a disease that inflicts heavy burdens and high costs for families, we will use lupus as a case study for today's conversation. Lupus is a chronic, long-term autoimmune disease that can cause pain and inflammation in any part of the body. Treating lupus can be difficult. There's no cure for the disease, and it can take months or even years to find the right combination of treatments to ease its symptoms. But there is hope for patients suffering with lupus and many more chronic diseases because of the very partnerships today's panel will highlight. Partnerships involving patients, federal research agencies, academic researchers, public and private labs, and private sector research and development. Achieving progress, both breakthrough progress and incremental progress, requires the participation of all parties. Dr. Criswell, the first question is for you. As director of NIAMS, you play a pivotal role in advancing lupus research. What is the role of public sector funded research in developing treatments against diseases such as lupus? And is the NIH only limited to basic research?
So thank you very much. And let me offer my deep gratitude to Research America for hosting this event, and also to Representatives Eshu and Curtis and Senator Murphy. So happy to be here. So as you heard, I'm the director of the National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases. So we cover a broad range of conditions, including lupus and other autoimmune diseases, but also diseases of the joints, muscle, bones, and skin. So we have a major portfolio. If you could show the next slide. So one of the points I'd like to emphasize is NIH, which is the largest supporter of biomedical research in the world, is deeply committed to the entire spectrum of research that starts with basic research, critically important in order to help us understand the underlying causes of diseases, to develop new treatments, to develop tools to measure outcomes for patients with these diseases. So we played a critical role in supporting basic discoveries so that we can turn those discoveries into long lives and health. But we also play an important role in translational research. So how can we take these basic discoveries from the laboratory and apply them to the clinical setting? As you heard, it's critically important that we move discoveries along this entire spectrum so that they can get to patients and to people who need them. Clinical research then takes off from where translational research leaves us, and that is, okay, we have evidence that this new discovery may be relevant to disease. Let's actually test it in a clinical setting. Let's bring patients to our research units and operations so that we can actually try to identify those treatments that are going to be successfully applied to treat and cure diseases. I thought I would leave you with one great example that I think illustrates this spectrum and what we can do as a federal agency completely committed to research. Going back 10 or 15 years ago, basic discoveries in a laboratory at NIAMS, my institute, well before I got there, in collaboration with Pfizer, an industry partner, made some basic discoveries that have now allowed for the development of a class of drugs called JAK inhibitors. These have had a profoundly positive impact on patients with autoimmune diseases. Now, originally, this drug was felt to be appropriate primarily for rheumatoid arthritis, but further discovery revealed that many other autoimmune diseases would probably benefit from this sort of approach. Lupus is one of those diseases. So we now have clinical trials studying the application of these new JAK inhibitors for treatment of lupus, and not simply for the control of the disease, but also for some of the internal complications of this disease, such as the inflammation in the blood vessels that results in very severe cardiovascular disease among many patients with lupus. So just to emphasize, this entire spectrum is critically important, and we're deeply committed to taking discoveries from the most basic level and making sure they get to patients at the bedside and in clinical settings.
Thank you, Dr. Criswell. Clay, let's get you in on this conversation. What is industry's role in the research continuum, and can you talk a little bit about how public and private partnerships work?
Absolutely. I want to echo my thanks for the opportunity to be here today and for Research America's leadership. Research America was a tremendous resource. I know when I was on the Hill and off the Hill to continuing the conversations around subject like we're talking about today, which is the discovery, development, and delivery of cures and treatments to patients. It's something as we look as Congress, as we as policy sphere look at issues, we always need to look at that continuum. We always need to look at that cycle. Because from the smallest issue to the biggest issue, any disruption of that cycle will slow cures and treatments from getting to patients. And so when we look at that, there are so many different stakeholders, so many different entities that are critical to that. One of those is industry. The industry, where it sits, is it takes all of that basic research that NIH does such a tremendous job in putting forward, and basically translates that into new medicines. I think you all will be familiar with how costly, intense, and risky that is. Unfortunately, not every product or not every compound that is researched ends up getting through the FDA approval process. But thankfully, due to the leadership of Congress, the federal policymakers, to industry, through that whole ecosystem, academia, we've been able to translate a lot of those discoveries to patients. And in lupus in particular, we're on the way. There's more that we need to do. But it's a costly endeavor that industry takes on, but it's an essential part of that process. Public-private partnerships is an arrangement that is utilized to basically take on some of those really difficult issues, challenges that one part of that ecosystem, one part of that cycle or that pipeline, it can't do it alone. One good example of that is Operation Warp Speed. Operation Warp Speed came forward, and because of that leadership and basically all of us coming together, we're sitting in this room today. I would say without Operation Warp Speed, you would see me on a Zoom screen. Maybe that's preferable for me or for others, but I would just say it's great to be in person. And this is the first, I think, in-person briefing for Research America. Thank goodness we're back, right? We're back together. But that's because government came forward with industry, came forward with other stakeholders, and takes on those challenges. So it's a really great model. It's something that's been employed and utilized in other settings as well. And hopefully we can use it to advance not only future treatments in lupus, but in other disease conditions.
Clay, I'm going to echo the thank you to Operation Warp Speed. Absolutely. We're grateful to be back in person. Mary, let's transition to you. And I'd like to drill down on patient involvement in every aspect of research and development. So this sounds good in theory. And I remember when I worked on the Hill, I had one boss who was always like, it sounds great in theory, but it may not work in practice. And so when we think about how it actually works in practice, can you tell us about some of the Lupus Foundation's initiatives that are involving patients in drug development?
Sure. Well, first, let me also add my thanks. Let me add my thanks to Research America. As Jocelyn mentioned, May is Lupus Awareness Month, and the theme for Lupus Awareness Month is to make lupus visible. So thrilled to be here today to shine a spotlight on lupus and talk to you a little bit about the disease. So some of the programs, it's hard to put things into practice, but we're really thrilled that the individual with lupus is really at the heart of everything that we do, and so the patient perspective is integrated into all of our work. And so we have initiatives that are focused on the patient-focused drug development. Some of those initiatives include development of a research registry called Research Accelerated by You, that's RAY, and that's designed to collect patient experiences to inform future clinical trials. We also have a project called Impact that's partially funded by the Office of Minority Health, and Impact is designed to increase minority participation in clinical trials. We've also led advocacy efforts to ensure that the patient voice is included in research efforts. Some of those efforts include advocacy around the 21st Century Cures Act, advocacy around the FDA Safety and Innovation Act, which really helped to establish the patient-focused drug development initiative. We've also been involved in working with the FDA and other stakeholders, other stakeholder community members, as the FDA has developed the patient-focused drug development for guidances, and we've shared the lupus patient perspective along the way. In 2017, we co-hosted an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. We led that meeting with the Lupus and Allied Diseases Association and the Lupus Research Alliance. And together, we brought together the patient community to really paint a picture about lupus, a clear picture about lupus. In that meeting, we had people with lupus who talked about the impact of the disease, talked about symptoms and the symptoms that really impacted their quality of life, that talked about the burden of the disease, the burden of treatments, the side effects of treatments, and the benefit risk. We also partnered with the FDA to educate the agency as they were conducting a series of listening sessions so that they could hear from patients about their experience living with lupus, as well as their concerns about clinical trials. And I would say that people with lupus are really the individuals who are driving our advocacy efforts. And it's really another example of elevating the patient voice. Their advocacy, the advocacy of people with lupus, really led to the establishment of the Congressional Lupus Caucus, which is Congressional Lupus Caucus is housed in the House. We have 60 members. Those members lead our advocacy for funding programs at the NIH, at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, the Office on Minority Health, the Department of Defense. And through the Department of Defense, the Lupus Research Program includes people with lupus at the table to review and give their input on research that is being funded. So I think that those are all good examples of bringing various stakeholders to the table. But what is really important here is that the individual, that the patient is really center and a focal point of all those efforts.
Mary, those are pretty substantial efforts across the research continuum. You mentioned the 21st Century Cures legislation. Clay, I want to bring you back into the conversation. You worked on that legislation during your time on Capitol Hill. And as we pull on this thread of moving from theory to practice, can you say a little bit more about that legislation, the patient engagement components contained therein, and whether or not you feel like the goals of the legislation have been realized?
Absolutely. 21st Century Cures, when we were putting forward that under Chairman Upton's leadership, one of the key components of it was ensuring that patients were integrated into the process at the beginning. I think you all will understand this, that there are some issues where as they're approached, patients are only brought in as the talking points are written about the policy. And that is a failure, not only because patients should be there at the beginning, but it's also a policy failure. The policy will not be as good without that. And so we tried to bring that into the beginning, and I'm thankful for Chairman Upton and Diana Goetz's leadership where we were able to do that. One of the key pieces of that is what Mary frankly talked about, is the patient engagement, where we were able to take steps in 2012 as part of the FDA user fee and the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act to basically put forward core elements of patient-focused drug development. And as Mary articulated, it's really one of the things, the goal of it was basically to take that patient perspective and ensure it could be integrated as FDA was reviewing the product, understand what patients care about most. Because one of the key pieces of that is that risk-benefit analysis. So where did the benefits outweigh the risk? And how do you make that decision without patient? So because of patient-focused drug development, it was put forward in 2012. We built on that in 21st Century Cures. And FDA has done a tremendous job. That process continues, where there's additional transparency. Patient groups can take it upon themselves, other advocates, to basically put forward their own and integrate that and make sure that's part of the process. I'll give you one personal example of this. I have psoriasis. And I was able to go to one of these patient-focused drug development meetings, and it was incredibly impactful because to see FDA and to see the patient advocates putting forward what I had experienced and understand that that was going to be part of the process as these new treatments were moving through the pipeline was incredibly meaningful to me. And listen, I benefit now because there's a biologic where as I was growing up, it was very difficult, but because of that biologic, because of that cycle of innovation, those cures and treatments, I benefit from that now. And it's the reality of like, when we talk about these abstract concepts, that's the reality of what we have here. As to whether 21st century cures in those pieces have achieved, the answer is it's an ongoing process, right? Because the policymaking process is iterative, as it always should be. Every piece of legislation that's passed, it's never perfect, right? That's what Chairman Dingell said when he was the chair and put forward an Energy and Commerce Committee. He was exactly right. That's the job of you all, of all of us in the policymaking community, is to continue to build on that and figure out how we can do it. I think there are great opportunities. We talked and have done a lot in the development side with FDA, ensuring that's part of it. I think there's more that we can do, frankly, there, but also from the reimbursement side, right? As we analyze and we put forward outcomes-based contracts or just understand like what's valuable to patient-reported outcomes or an outcomes measures. And I know that process, it's a huge undertaking, but it's one that is absolutely critical to ensuring that when we're moving forward these cures and treatments, they're meeting the ends of what the patients want and not just what some others.
Thank you, Clay, and thanks for sharing that powerful example of practice, like in practice. Dr. Criswell, back to you. So let's talk a little bit more about how NIAMS really works across the research continuum. Can you tell us more about some of the partnerships with industry and patient advocacy organizations? If I'm not mistaken, there's a Lupus Federal Working Group. There's also the Accelerating Medicines Partnership. Tell us a little bit more about what you are doing there.
Yes, let me start by saying collaboration has been a theme for my entire career. It's so critically important for us to be effective and efficient. So I'll mention 3 examples. The first, as you just heard, NIAMS leads a Lupus Federal Working Group that meets twice a year to bring together various stakeholder groups that are committed to lupus research and dissemination and to talk about our plans and to coordinate so that we can be effective, support each other, integrate our efforts, and to be much more efficient. Really have enjoyed those meetings very much. I also will mention that NIAMS has a coalition of over 90 organizations that has an interest in some aspect of the diseases we support, psoriasis, in addition to lupus and many others, and they can help us work effectively to bring the patient voice in to researchers, to Congress, to help make visible and to increase awareness, the challenges of the many diseases that we support in terms of research, training, and our dissemination efforts. So we are so grateful to have the support of so many coalition partners. And the lupus organizations, Lupus Foundation of America and Lupus Research Alliance, are very active as part of the coalition. And then actually, if you can show, go ahead, one more slide. I want to mention this very exciting effort called the Accelerating Medicines Partnership. This was launched in 2014. It was a very risky and visible effort that has been wildly successful. It's a public-private partnership. You can see illustrated on this slide many institutes across the NIH, and I'm just highlighting for you one of the initial programs that focused on lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. We were so lucky to be part of this effort from ground zero. So several institutes and centers came together to support this work, together with many industry partners in a roughly 50-50 contribution of resources, several professional and provider organizations, including LRA and LFA once again. And it's remarkable what has been possible through this effort, which now continues into a second iteration. But just to give you a flavor for what this has allowed, these investigators and industry partners decided that to really understand this disease, you have to look at individual cells in the target tissue And that means kidney for lupus or skin for lupus, the joint for rheumatoid arthritis, and to interrogate individual cells to try to understand what pathways they're stimulating and being stimulated by, so that we can understand in a much better way what is going on in these diseases. And we are discovering quickly through this effort, too, that discoveries in one arena we recognize can have relevance to diseases that we never even considered to be related. So this has been an incredibly exciting and successful effort. And I'm so happy to say that it is in its second iteration now, initiated in 2021, and has been expanded beyond rheumatoid arthritis and lupus to include psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, and Sjogren's disease, another really important autoimmune disease. And now there are many other parallel efforts in neurodegenerative disease, cardiovascular disease, endocrinologic disease. And we know that we will benefit, the lupus community will benefit from those other discoveries and efforts across this whole spectrum of disease. So really committed to partnerships. And those are just kind of a few examples to give you a sense of that.
Thank you, Dr. Criswell. Mary, I want to go back to one of the key partnerships that you mentioned with the Office of Minority Health. We know from vast amounts of data that there are health disparities that exist and are often persistent. That was highlighted during COVID as well. So can you talk a little bit more about that partnership with the Office of Minority Health and how it is really leading to not only patient engagement and involvement, but also improved health outcomes?
So the focus on that project, again, that's impact, improving minority participation in clinical trials. We're looking at how to increase participation across racial and ethnic minority groups. We are one of five groups that have been given an award. Our work on this project is to really, there's several components of the project, but all of them include working with popular opinion leaders. And these are individuals that we have identified who are influencers, who are trusted sources in the community. And so we're working with nurses, we're working with patient navigators, but we're also working with individuals with lupus. And we just finished a training actually a few weeks ago. But over the course of this past year, we have trained 60 individuals with lupus about the drug development process, about the pipeline for lupus, about challenges and barriers to participating in clinical trials, and how to talk to individuals about lupus. And so this group of individuals is now part of what we call our Lupus Research Action Network. And these individuals are now going into the community, talking with their peers about lupus and lupus research and the importance of participating in clinical trials.
Mary, I imagine a huge component of that is building trust. Those are trusted relationships and building trust in the government and programs so that people do participate in clinical trials.
Exactly.
Clay, I'm going to reverse a little bit to go forward. Can you walk us through the clinical trial process just so we're clear on how it works?
Sure. I don't know how much time we have left, but we can.
The floor is yours, Clay.
I think the clinical trial process, if you guys had an opportunity to pick this up on the way in, this does a tremendous job of walking through the different pieces of it. Clinical trial process, as you move through 3 different phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. That's what you hear a lot about as you hear and interface and work on FDA-related issues. And that's where I think the industry participation, in particular, other patient participation, is absolutely so critical. It's also, I talked about risk earlier. It's also where the risk is really, you may see it's very visible in that there will be certain products that move through phase 2 and they think it's on the way to phase 3, and that's where you would submit an application, a new drug application or a biologics license application to the FDA, and you may be on the way. But the clinical trials and that clinical trial process and the need to diversify it, there was a lot of work that was done in Congress. There's a lot of credit, as well as the administration, to try to make that more diverse, ensure it's inclusive and reflective of those who are going to use it as possible. That's where those clinical trials and how those read out absolutely the most important, because we want to ensure that as products move to patients, they're safe and effective, right? That's the gold standard. That is something that is guarded very, very, is very important to the FDA, as it should be all of us, to ensure that we have confidence as a public in what comes through. But that's a basic overview. I would encourage, though, I think this infographic that Research America has put forward is actually, this is really outstanding. So credit to you all for that, and hopefully it provides a little more detail on that process.
Thank you, Claire. Mary, you've told us a little bit about the patient role in clinical trials. Dr. Criswell, I'd like to tap your experience as a rheumatologist, which you've alluded to talk about how clinicians fit into the pipeline.
Yes, I'm really happy to talk about that. And let me start by saying, when I decided as a young person that I wanted to pursue science, I had the opportunity to go to medical school, and through my medical training found patients with lupus and related diseases to be so compelling. I decided ultimately to become a rheumatologist. And then, because there was such a great need, I decided that I wanted to focus most of my effort on research. So I've been a lupus researcher for 30 years, and engaging the patient and making research relevant to patients is so critically important. I used to take my research group on road trips around the state of California. We visited other states to get the word out. We want to help you. In order to help you, we need your participation in research, and we want our research to be relevant to you, not just to those who can make their way to academic medical centers. So rheumatologists and other clinicians who see these patients can play such a critical role in awareness of the benefits of participating in clinical research, providing actual access to clinical research. And as has been alluded to in several of us already, the research has to be taking place where patients are and with patients that are affected by this disease, not just individuals who can make their way to the NIH or to an academic medical center. So we are thinking creatively about how to bring the research to where the patients are. There are a couple of examples I can mention briefly of studies that we're supporting at NIAMS. One study led by a Dr. Che, who is studying barriers and facilitators to COVID testing and vaccination for lupus patients in Alabama and Louisiana. Huge needs there. Have to bring the research to the people that need it. Another research effort that we're supporting with Dr. Megan Close is designed to help women with lupus have healthy pregnancies. Women with lupus are much more likely to suffer severe complications of pregnancy. And so the appropriate education of the providers and the patients, timing of pregnancy, what to look out for during pregnancy are critically important. And we're so thrilled to be able to support that research. And we're also supporting other efforts that creatively seek to enlist community partners, gyms, YMCAs, churches, to help bring research to patients where they need them. So really excited about the potential importance and the increased opportunities to bring the research to those who really need it. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Mary, I don't want to leave this question about patient involvement in clinical trials if there's more that you want to add. Floor is yours.
So yeah, I would say that it's really important to ensure that that the individual with lupus or the patient is part of every step of that drug development process, that they are not just individuals who are participating in trials, and while that is important, but they are also a partner in research. And so I would say that the patient's involvement in clinical trials is at every stage of the drug development. So from basic research to clinical trials and beyond, that includes helping to provide guidance on the research that's going to have the greatest impact on patients' lives. It includes informing the protocols and the protocols for studies and making sure that they're not too burdensome for individuals to participate. It includes participating in those clinical trials, and it also includes providing feedback on the individual's satisfaction with their care and how the disease and treatment is affecting their physical, their mental, the emotional, their spiritual, and their overall well-being. And so So yeah, I think that it's really critical that patients are your partner, are partners in research and involved in every aspect of that drug development process.
Thank you, Mary. Just a note to the audience, we are down to our final 3 questions, so please get your audience questions ready. So with that, I would like to ask each of you, what are your sector's goals for the research and development pipeline, and what do you want the audience to take away from today's discussion? And we should move to slide 5, please. Who wants to start?
I contributed that slide, so I'll start. So this is our vision. Lupus is a disease that has tremendous needs across the entire spectrum, from basic discovery, translation to patients, and to communities in the world. And we are convinced that the only way to make progress in this area is a comprehensive, collaborative, and coordinated effort, which is a theme of this panel, as you've been hearing. And, you know, the partnerships and collaboration has to go beyond the United States to globally if we want to have a global impact. I just returned from Seoul, Korea, where I attended the International Congress on Lupus, and it was so exciting to see the commitment and the interest in collaborating and coordinating our efforts for lupus research and training around the world. So I show you this because I think this illustrates the concept that we think is appropriate for lupus, which is that we really need a research ecosystem that will allow us to incorporate all of the many different factors that begin with who are the patients, patient-reported outcomes, deep characterizations by knowledgeable physicians, the environment, the microbiome, genetics, cells, pathways, behavioral and psychosocial factors. All of those things are important. So how do we bring those together? We can't make progress if we study a little teeny piece of this in isolation. So we're trying to create research ecosystems that will bring all of this critical information and data together so that we can truly understand in a deep way this disease and make the progress that we need to be making. So I guess what I'd like to say is that we are deeply committed to doing the hard work to create these sort of environments that will allow us to make progress in this disease. Our goal at the NIH is to turn discovery into health, and this is what it's going to take. So I want to leave you with this theme of a research ecosystem. That's where we're trying to go, and it's going to require a lot of coordinated effort around the world, just like you're hearing about today.
I'll try to follow back. That was outstanding. I think from the industry standpoint, the goal would be on a high level is just to continue to strengthen that pipeline and find ways to do that. The reason for it is because whether it's lupus or other diseases, there's a great patient need out there, and finding ways to accelerate that cycle, accelerate that pipeline will enable them to get the cures and treatments that they absolutely need. So that would be the goal.
And so when it comes to research and development pipeline for lupus, I would say that there are 3 goals for us. The first is to decrease the time to diagnosis. It takes an average of 6 years before individuals with lupus are diagnosed with lupus from the time they first experience symptoms. It's unacceptable. We need to change that. The other is to ensure that we have an arsenal of treatments for people with lupus. It was just in the last few years that, and actually in just last 2 years, that we had 2 drugs developed specifically for lupus. Before 2012, people with lupus waited a half century before they had a new treatment. So it's just really recently that we now have 3 treatments. Great news, but that's not enough. Lupus is so diverse and it's different in everybody. We need that arsenal of treatment. And that third goal is probably no surprise, based on what I've been talking about today, is to ensure that people with lupus are partners in research and development, and they are involved in every step of the way.
Thank you all. What about new policy developments on the horizon and potential impacts on patients and industry? One example is the Inflation Reduction Act, but what are some of the other policies that this audience should be aware of? And from one hill rat to another, Clay, we'll start with you.
Thank you. We've been talking about that cycle, discovery, development, delivery. Any change, whether it's a regulatory change to a legislative change, can help accelerate it, or it could help slow it or decrease it. The ability to provide those cures and treatments. And there's a lot of discussion that needs to happen, frankly, around the implications of and the repercussions of the Inflation Reduction Act. So you all would be familiar with it. Three main elements that get talked about. One is related to Medicare Part D monetization. The second is related to inflationary rebates. The third is related to negotiation. There's been a lot of focus on negotiation, and rightfully so. That is, CMS currently is building basically that capability to negotiate. We'll see, there's been a lot of discussion around the law this year on what are going to be the top, the 10 drugs that get picked that will be negotiated. And it's a really important question, and there are repercussions in of that. In addition to that, though, and I worry about that, frankly, I also worry about where we are in 5 or 10 years, because it's not only those drugs that are going to be subject to negotiating are already on those lists, it's the ones that are moving through that clinical trials process or in preclinical or are even thought about that frankly are not going to go forward because of the Inflation Reduction Act policies. And there needs to be a fulsome policy debate around that, because I mentioned it earlier, I have psoriasis, I have a treatment, but there are so many patients that don't. And we talk about hope. Well, hope is something that moves forward, and that's what patients and their caregivers, their families really, that's what they have to have, right? But we need a full discussion on the implications of the IRA and what it does to that hope and a reality on it. And so that's a lot more to this. It's a huge policy change, huge disruption in that cycle. And I'll just close with what I mean by that is there were decisions made, whether it's the Orphan Drug Act to the biologics legislation that Ranking Member Eshu worked on that got part of the ACA, to discussions around patent law. All of those got disrupted by the IRA in the negotiation. And so what does that mean? We haven't had that discussion as a policy, policy community. Congress doesn't have that debate, I would argue. And so I would just say we need to better understand that.
Mary, anything to add?
I would just say that with the Inflation Reduction Act includes critical provisions that the lupus community has really long championed, such as the 2,000 out-of-pocket cap, as well as the smoothing option that helps to spread the cost of treatment costs throughout the course of the year. Both those policies will increase patient access to care. But that being said, there are concerns about the unintended consequences, and that remains to be seen. But what we're concerned about include increases in utilization management and access to treatments, not only today, but access to treatments that have not yet been developed. And so while we have three treatments specifically for lupus, which is great, we need more. And so with in an area with limited resources, we're really concerned about the potential of limiting that drug development. And so people with lupus will continue to play a critical role in helping to advance research that leads to new treatments, but also to shape the coverage policies that can ensure that people have access to new treatments.
Thank you, Mary. Let's end our panel on a high note. What about the research and development ecosystem brings you hope? Dr. Criswell, we'll start with you.
Well, I am an optimist, but there are many things that give me hope that we will continue to make progress. thinking about the success of the Accelerating Medicines Partnership and what we've learned over the course of 5 or 6 years related to lupus and other autoimmune diseases brings me hope. Meeting with lupus investigators, young and old, from around the world in Seoul, Korea, and spending 4 or 5 days together to talk about how can we solve this worldwide problem from our many different perspectives brings me hope. And most importantly, when I meet the young people, now as young as my daughters, who are interested in going into medicine and becoming scientists and contributing to research or providing care, that really brings me hope. So the future looks bright to me. We, as you've heard, the job is, not done yet, but we're making good progress. Let's keep working together to try to bring new treatments to the lupus patient and to ensure they can get access to the treatment and care that they need.
I'll go next. I think I am an optimist as well. And I think when you think about what has happened in this space, especially in this country, the last 4 years, it's an incredible success story where it's the advent of new technologies that continues to today. It's awe-inspiring. Whether we mentioned COVID earlier with the mRNA technologies that came forward, traditional technologies that were able to, frankly, I think, save the country, save the world. That is an amazing success story. And that's just the beginning where, whether it's mRNA to cell and gene technology, others, it holds so much promise, and it does hold so much hope for patients. And I think that is something that we just need to continue to seize on and to build on and to understand what we can do to help foster. And I think conversations like this today and that are happening, all over Capitol Hill around the world are really needed. And I think the future is bright, just given what we're able to do, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to do for patients.
And so you heard me just speak about the recent drug development for lupus. And so we've made tremendous progress in recent years, and that's incredible and exciting. But what's also really exciting is to see that there's more basic research. There's more companies coming to the table and doing research. There's more drugs in the pipeline. There's more stakeholders that are coming together and working together. And what's really exciting is that the patient is part of that process, and they are at the table, and that's pretty amazing, and that gives us all hope.
So I'll just end with what gives me hope is that all of you are at the table. So it's pretty impressive, the work that you're doing. So Dr. Criswell, Clay, Mary, thank you. Let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. And with that, we'll open the floor to audience questions. Yes, ma'am.
Much. I'd like to follow up on the international note that our NIH colleague here mentioned. I don't need to say the political schisms worldwide are increasing. I want to ask you how your work at NIH globally is affected, everything from basic research, translational research, and clinical trials, when we have reasons for doubt, shall we say, of what's coming in from China or Russia or some others in those markets. How does this play out in NIH ideas?
Yeah, really good question. And, I was just in this meeting in Korea and with researchers all around the world. And, we're one community. On the scientists, we communicate freely, we want to collaborate. So we, in some respects, rise above the politics because we're really deeply committed to getting the work done, and we can't do that in isolation. So there are plenty of collaborations, international collaborations between NIH investigators that work at NIH and the investigators that we fund. Yes, we have to be careful and aware. We have to be mindful of security practices and respectful of all the legitimate concerns, but really we're trying to look above and beyond that, because if we don't work together as a global community, we're not going to get to where we want to be. But, this plays out in terms of, details like, okay, here in the US, we care about social determinants of health. So, how can we align the data we're collecting to make a difference there with data in Africa and data in Asia and Europe? And we're having those conversations. The Lupus Research Alliance just hosted a meeting a few months ago about how can we align research efforts across the world in the area of social determinants of health. So, we're part of this community. We're mindful of, the concerns that are raised and respectful of legitimate concerns, but, we're going to forge ahead.
Yes, ma'am.
I've heard a lot about treatment and aspirational cures, not very much about prevention. Maybe that's unrealistic in this particular space, but could you just speak to that? Any of you?
I'm happy to speak to that. So there are several studies that the NIH and other organizations are funding now that looks at prevention, starting with high-risk individuals. So there are a number of studies in type 1 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and lupus, for example, studying over time relatives of people that have these diseases and looking at their genetics and looking at the development of autoantibodies that we know can develop before disease and looking at all of these other factors, early indicators of disease, so that as a starting point, we can intervene before the disease is out of control. We think about the disease process as you're born with a certain amount of inherent risk, and then you're exposed to factors, whether it's in the environment, internal or external, over the course of your lifetime that increase your risk further. So the earlier we can identify when the first stages of the disease are occurring and if intervene at that point, the better off we'll be. In fact, there are a couple of studies underway now at rheumatoid arthritis and lupus where Plaquenil, a drug called hydroxychloroquine that's been around forever, is being given to people who aren't sick yet. But we think they're at such high risk that by intervening at that stage, we might be able to prevent the disease. So we're optimistic that we'll make progress on that front as well.
Other questions?
Earlier in the panel, you shared stories about how important it is to be patient input. And I was curious if anyone could share an example of a type of patients and something that changed the way you thought about something or the direction that you took to that.
Dr. Prismo, you're on the hot. I'm happy to. Yeah, no, so it's interesting. And this was a big topic of discussion at the International Lupus Congress. So if you ask a physician, how is this patient doing? They're going to do a physical exam. They might look at the skin. They might do some blood tests, and they might even do a formalized assessment of activity or severity. And they'll say, this patient is doing such and such. And then you ask that patient, how do you think you're doing? There is very little agreement between the physician perspective and the patient perspective. So there's discordance there. So several things as awareness, and this has only happened because of greater appreciation and respect for the patient voice. So as we think of patients more and more as participants in the research, first of all, we've developed a whole new series of measures to assess how they're doing, their fatigue, their psychological status, et cetera, that weren't part of our repertoire before. And then we start measuring those in clinical trials to see, okay, if someone's getting better, why do we say they're getting better? Are the patient measures showing improvement, or is it just these laboratory tests? And the ultimate goal is to figure out how these things connect. Why is it that the way we've been looking at the disease from the physician standpoint isn't aligned with the way the patient is feeling? Eventually, we're going to figure this all out, and all of these dots are going to connect, and we're going to understand more holistically what's going on with patients. But it starts with being respectful of the patient perspective. They are the person, at the heart of this. Then develop measurings that capture accurately their perspective and measuring them and studying them in the context of clinical trials. So it's been fascinating to see how much discordance there is. And something 20 or 30 years ago, no one was talking about this. When I was in medical school, no one was talking about this. Things have really changed.
And Mary, what you referenced earlier, some of the patient-focused drug development work that you have done, that will help FDA, will help others better understand that as well, I would assume. So that was the reason that was included as part of Asia and all of these other efforts, but it just that discordance, it's helpful to understand where the other patients sit and where they sit. So it's awesome to hear that's already underway.
I would just share that we have worked with some of our industry partners, and specifically, I'm thinking about one who did a series of focus groups with individuals with lupus, and they showed them the protocol for an upcoming study, and they got their input, and they did make changes to the number of visits and the frequency of the tests that they were doing, and what type of background information about the study was really important to them. We often hear from people that are participating in clinical trials. They also want to know the outcome. They spent all this time participating in the trial. They often don't know if they're getting treatment or if they're getting placebo. They want to know the outcome, and so that was something else that they heard through the focus groups and worked to address.
Yes.
Hi, this Lee Harrison here, representing Lupus and Allied Disease Association, also Chief Research and Innovation Officer with Lupus Chat. And I actually spoke at the Lupus EFB meetings some years ago. My question is, I know we all heard Joel talk about the importance for patient involvement in research and policy. And then we also spoke about SDOH and disparities. Is there an effort among, with federal organizations, industries, and among nonprofits to have patients who aren't necessarily plugged in themselves or others who, to get them access to the information on how to live with policy as well as English, getting their voice heard for drug development, etc. Is there a program in place or something that each of your industries or organizations are going to encompass that for?
I would say that we are actively working with the community, encouraging them to become e-advocates and to participate in our National Advocacy Summit. That's a really important role, bringing that voice so that when we meet with policy, when we meet with our federal leaders and bringing individuals on the Hill to share their story, share their experiences. And so we do have a number of ways that we are doing that at a federal level, but also at a state level.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess I would add that we are seeking input from patients in a variety of ways, including our strategic planning process. So we hope to engage and to hear the patient voice through the work with our coalition partners. We also have patients on review panels for the grants to help us decide which applications to fund. We have patients involved in some of the planning efforts for big efforts across the NIH. We're challenged to get access to reach all patients that are affected by these conditions. And this is, in addition to the coalition partners, why we also rely on physicians, and not just specialists, but also primary care physicians. So it's a challenging effort. I also will say that there are a number of websites increasingly, such as clinicaltrials.gov, that advertises research studies that are underway and looking for participants around the country. So getting the word out to everybody is challenging, but we're committed to bringing in the patient perspective in the planning of our research, the review of our research, and certainly for conducting clinical trials.
And I'll just say it's a tremendous question, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to reach, where we need to be. And it is something that I think CMS has put forward as a really high priority. And I just encourage everyone to continue to work with them. We need to work with MS policy community and help them, because not everybody can check their email all the time, or a lot of the listening sessions are when people are at work or taking care of their kids, right? And I think that's just a perspective that we just need to continue to help provide provide that feedback, but also provide kind of solutions or help, right? Because they're doing their best, but we all need to kind of row together to figure out how we reach the state where we need to be, because we're not there yet.